When a man ignores you, your first thought is often, "What did I do wrong? Did I perhaps say something inappropriate? Has his interest suddenly changed?" But what if I told you that his indifference often has more to do with his own insecurities than with any mistake you may have made? Louise Hay once said that what we see in others is often a reflection of our own fears and inner wounds. So when a man decides to distance himself and avoid you, what is he truly expressing through his silence? Is it coldness, disinterest, or merely a mask behind which he hides from what he cannot admit to you or even to himself? The truth is, just like women, men also carry many shadows within them. Hidden corners of the mind where their deepest fears reside. Louise Hay referred to this as the shadow, that part of our personality we want to deny or suppress. When a man ignores you, it is not always a sign of disinterest. Often it is rather an expression of his own insecurity, his fear of intimacy, or a deep-seated feeling of unworthiness that he would rather avoid facing. His apparent indifference can, in reality, be the clearest sign of an internal battle he himself doesn't fully understand. But why do some men behave this way? Is it pride, emotional coldness, or simply a deep fear of being vulnerable? It is easy to interpret his silence as strength, but perhaps it is quite the opposite. Louise Hay said that what we do not bring into consciousness ends up ruling our lives, and we call it fate. So, does this man who ignores you really have control? Or is he, in truth, a prisoner of his own internal conflicts? And this is where many women make the most common mistake. They see his indifference as a challenge, trying to win his attention, to prove their worth, or to decode his behavior. But according to Louise Hay, true strength is not about chasing the unattainable. It lies in the ability to learn from every experience and to strengthen your own essence. Instead of asking yourself what his silence means, what if you asked yourself what it is meant to reveal to you about yourself? Think about it. Perhaps his greatest weakness does not lie in his apparent emotional numbness, but in his inability to deal with what he truly feels for you. In this video, we will explore what it really means when a man ignores you and why this behavior, far from being a sign of strength, is often the key to reclaiming your own power. He pulls away because he feels confident you will always be there, that you will not let him go no matter what. He believes he can come and go as he pleases, trusting that your interest will remain intact. But what happens when that certainty disappears? When you are no longer the predictable woman he took for granted? Louise Hay said that the greatest illusion humans have is believing they can control what they do not understand. And this applies deeply to relationships. A man only truly feels the absence of a woman when he realizes that his assumed stability has been replaced by uncertainty. His strength does not lie in walking away, but in the belief that you would never leave. But when you stop reacting, stop waiting, stop showing up, everything changes. You are no longer a passive figure in his story. You become a mystery he can no longer decipher. And that is exactly when his inner conflict begins, because, as Louise Hay said, what humans fear most is what they cannot predict. Not knowing what you will do next creates doubts within him more powerful than any sense of loss. Many women fall into the trap of trying to regain the attention of a man who ignores them. They post subtle hints, check if he has seen their messages, or find excuses to appear in his line of sight. Yet paradoxically, all of these efforts only strengthen his sense of control. What truly changes the game is the understanding that your absence speaks louder than any desperate attempt to be noticed. When he realizes that you no longer text, no longer react, no longer try to catch his attention, an emptiness begins to form in his mind, and that emptiness starts to gnaw at him. The woman he thought he knew is no longer there. And this is the first major weakness of a man who ignores a woman. He only feels superior as long as he believes she remains available. But once that belief shatters, he falls into a state of uncertainty, and suddenly begins to ask himself questions he never dared to ask before. What if I lost something valuable? What if she is no longer part of my world like before? Louise Hay said that everything we reject in others is merely a reflection of what we have not yet accepted within ourselves. That's why many men do not pull away because they lack interest, but because they cannot face the influence you have over them. But what happens when one day they realize they have lost you? Let's take it a step further. Would you like to know the 5 most sensitive points of a man who distances himself and ignores you? Those inner triggers that, when touched, can make even the proudest men reconsider everything. Then stay with me, because what's coming next could forever change the way you view this entire dynamic. When you decide to disappear from his life, when you stop reacting to his indifference, something unexpected happens. He starts to feel a new, unfamiliar kind of restlessness. Suddenly, the presence he once took for granted is no longer there, and without realizing it, he gets a small taste of his own medicine. The silence that once made him feel powerful now turns against him. Louise Hay said that the human psyche always seeks balance. When one pole disappears, the other intensifies. Where he once felt confident ignoring you, he now feels the heavy emptiness of your absence. And here, the first signs begin to show. He suddenly watches your stories, reacts to one of your posts, or leaves a casual comment, almost as if trying to remind you that he still exists. But the difference is this: he can no longer be sure that you are still there for him. The attention he once received effortlessly now becomes his greatest weakness. Louise Hay taught that the human mind hates uncertainty, and when something reliable suddenly vanishes, the brain goes into alert mode. This is the second major weak spot of a man who ignores you, his false certainty that you would always be there. When that illusion breaks, his inner foundation begins to crumble. And this is just the beginning. Would you like to learn what other vulnerable points can make a man react in ways he never expected? Stay with me, because what you are about to hear could completely change the way you see his behavior and your role in this story. One of the reasons why a man feels so confident ignoring you is because he believes he has control over the situation. When he senses that you are emotionally dependent on his attention, that you are afraid of losing him, or believe you will never find someone better, it feeds his ego, and his indifference becomes a power play. But what happens when this dynamic shifts? When a woman stops radiating an energy of lack and instead embodies confidence and abundance, something within him begins to tremble. Louise Hay said that what we resist persists, and in relationships it's often the same. The more you chase someone, the further they pull away. But when you step back and center your life around yourself, everything changes. Because once he notices that his influence over you is fading, that his absence no longer affects you the way it used to, something inside him begins to shift. A new feeling emerges: insecurity. And that is the crucial turning point. The game changes when you strengthen your self-worth, when you stop settling for crumbs of attention, and most importantly, when you realize you have nothing to prove to anyone. The woman who knows herself, who knows her value, she does not chase, she does not beg, and she does not lose herself hoping to be seen. She simply becomes irresistible, because she radiates a magnetic energy that is not dependent on external validation. And when you reach this level of inner security, you don't just reclaim your own power, you weaken his. Suddenly, he is no longer sure if he can ignore you and just return whenever he pleases, without consequences. Now, he is the one beginning to wonder, what if she is no longer there when I want to come back? Before we move on to the next vulnerable point of a man who ignores you, let me ask you a question. Have you ever felt that a man ignored you simply because he knew he could, without anything changing for him? If this message resonates with you, give this video a like and comment where you're watching from. And stay with me, because at the end of the video, I'll explain exactly how you can make a man who distances himself start to truly value you, and even fear losing you. So stay with me, because now we are uncovering another vulnerable point that can completely shift the dynamic. When a man pulls away and ignores you, he often does so with the arrogance of someone who believes he is the center of your universe. He feels unique, special, irreplaceable for your happiness. And do you know why? Because many women, often unconsciously, nourish exactly this illusion. They lose themselves in the relationship, invest all their energy into him, and forget that there are many other areas of their lives that are just as important. Louise Hay said, "Whatever we focus our energy on grows. So if you pour all your attention into a man who ignores you, you only reinforce his sense of control over you." But what happens when he suddenly realizes he is no longer the center of your world? The third weak point of a man who ignores you is precisely this illusion of exclusivity. And to break this cycle, you must weaken exactly this sense of superiority that keeps him comfortably in his zone. The best way to do that, reconnect with yourself and with the people and passions that bring true value to your life, your friends, your family, your interests. Maybe, without even realizing it, you neglected these connections because you were too focused on him. But when you decide to shift your priorities, something powerful happens, your world expands, your energy changes, and you realize that he was never the sole pillar of your happiness. And one important thing, this is not about finding another man to replace him. You don't need to fill a void. The key lies in rediscovering yourself, opening up to new experiences, and surrounding yourself with people who make you feel valuable and whole, independently of any partner. And what happens to him during this process? The feeling of being irreplaceable begins to crumble. Louise Hay said, "The thing people fear the most is losing control over what they once took for granted. And when a man realizes that you are no longer the woman who patiently waited for him, he starts to feel exactly what you once felt because of him: insecurity." For him, this is a heavy blow, but that's not all, because now, at this point, the rules of the game completely change. And in the next few minutes, I will show you how you can use this shift to your advantage, so that you are no longer the one waiting, but he becomes the one doubting whether he can ignore you without consequences. So stay with me, because what comes next could fundamentally change how you see this entire situation. One of the greatest weak points of a man who ignores you is his, often unconscious, need to feel irreplaceable to you. There are men who truly believe that a woman needs them, emotionally, financially, or for a sense of security. And this belief gives them an illusory sense of control. But what happens when you make it clear to him that your life does not depend on his presence, that you do not need him, but consciously choose who you allow into your life? In that very moment, the dynamic changes. You are no longer the woman who needs him, the woman he could thoughtlessly ignore. You are now an independent woman, one who needs no one to feel whole, and who keeps only those who truly add value to her life. And that is something that can shake him to his core, because it means if he still wants to be part of your life, he must prove that he truly has something valuable to offer. It is no longer enough to simply show up now and then, or to display sporadic interest. The responsibility now lies with him, and this is where the game changes completely. He can continue ignoring you if he wishes, but what once gave him an advantage now begins to turn against him. Because as you continue to evolve, to grow, and to become stronger and more self-assured, he realizes something he never considered before. He no longer holds the same power over you he once had. And then a truth emerges that he can no longer ignore. It is not you who loses, it is him. Before we get to the final piece of advice, the one that will show you exactly how to make a man who has pulled away not only appreciate you, but even fear losing you, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever recognized this pattern in a relationship? If this video helps you see things more clearly, give it a like and comment where you're watching from. Because what's coming next could completely change your perspective on this entire situation. So stay with me, because now we are about to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. A man's self-esteem is one of his most sensitive points, and also one of his greatest weaknesses. When he decides to distance himself and ignore you, he often does so from a place of apparent self-confidence. But here comes a crucial insight from Louise Hay. A person's identity is shaped by the reflections and projections they receive from others. What does this mean? When a man feels admired, desired, and valued by a woman, he receives an invisible fuel that feeds his ego and gives him a sense of control over the situation. But what happens when this source of validation dries up? When he no longer feels your unconditional admiration, when your attention simply disappears without warning, then something inside him starts to crumble. Because the truth is, most men only recognize the true value of a woman's presence once she emotionally withdraws. There is no need to actively ignore him or to play games. The true change happens when you stop treating him as something special, when you no longer elevate his role in your life, when he is no longer the center of your universe, and this strikes his psyche in a way he cannot even put into words. Louise Hay said, "The human unconscious reacts symbolically. When a man realizes that the woman who once made him feel important no longer looks at him the same way, when she no longer assigns him the same significance, something within him falls out of balance and he can't fully explain it, but he feels it. And here lies the key. This is one of a man's most powerful weak spots. He becomes used to being desired and admired without having to do anything to earn it. But the moment that validation disappears, comfortable security turns into a painful void, a vacuum he cannot fill. And exactly at that moment, you must be one step ahead. Instead of begging for attention or trying to prove your worth, you simply pull your energy back and redirect it towards yourself. You become the woman who does not need anyone's approval to feel complete. And in that very moment, he starts to realize what he is truly losing. But there's even more. In the next few moments, I will show you how to completely reverse this dynamic, so that you no longer wonder if you are good enough, but rather he starts to question whether he can continue ignoring you without facing consequences, because what's coming next is the final key. And it will ensure that you are no longer the one waiting, but that he is the one feeling the urgency to win you back. So stay with me, because this final part could change everything: how you see him, how you see yourself, and most importantly, how he sees you from now on. When a woman becomes fully aware of her own value and realizes that her well-being does not depend on a man's presence or recognition, the dynamics of the relationship shift profoundly. The man who once felt confident ignoring her, trusting she would always be there, no matter how he treated her, suddenly starts to feel something he never experienced before: insecurity. Because the moment he realizes that the attention and affection he once received unconditionally are no longer available without effort, his sense of certainty begins to crumble. He is forced to question many things he previously took for granted. One of the most crucial factors in triggering this effect within a man has nothing to do with manipulation tactics or artificial indifference. It is about applying a much more powerful principle, the principle of reciprocity. Louise Hay said that relationships are mirrors, reflecting back to us what we put into them. But when there is an imbalance in that mirror, when only one side gives admiration, desire, and attention, while the other only receives without feeling obligated to reciprocate, the balance tips in favor of the one who invests the least. This is exactly what happens when a woman gives everything without paying attention to whether she receives anything in return. When a man becomes accustomed to receiving love and attention without effort, those gestures lose their value for him. He begins to see her presence as a right, not a privilege that demands care and reciprocity. This is why so many women end up feeling exhausted and frustrated in relationships. They give everything, hoping that one day the man will realize what he has and will return the same love with equal intensity. But the reality is, that recognition does not come through passive waiting. It comes through an inner transformation that shifts the power dynamic in the relationship. And that is exactly the shift you should begin now. A woman who knows her own worth never gives everything unconditionally or without ensuring there is balance. She knows that a healthy and meaningful relationship is based on reciprocity, and that self-love is the foundation of every real connection. When a woman internalizes this mindset, everything changes. The man who once ignored her, confident that he could leave and return without losing her, is suddenly confronted with a new reality. Suddenly, he can no longer be sure she will still be there, ready to settle for the scraps of his attention. And exactly at that point, his certainty begins to crumble. He starts to wonder whether he truly has control over the situation, or whether he already lost it. If you have ever felt like you gave more in a relationship than you received, share your experience in the comments. And if this content helps you see more clearly, give it a like, because what's coming next could completely change your perspective on this situation. True change happens when you realize that the way a man treats you is a direct reflection of the place he believes he holds in your life. If he thinks he can distance himself, ignore you, and come back at will without consequences, he will never have any real incentive to put in effort or fear losing you. Louise Hay explained that people unconsciously test the boundaries of others to see how far they can go without facing consequences. And this happens in relationships more often than you might think. Many men, often without realizing it, fall into behavioral patterns where they distance themselves, show indifference, and play with a woman's emotional uncertainty. Why? Because they assume that no matter what they do, she will remain available. But what happens when that certainty suddenly disappears? When a woman decides to stop giving free validation? When she breaks the predictability in her behavior? It has a profound effect on the man's psyche. He had gotten used to the idea that his mere presence was enough to receive attention and admiration without any effort. But the moment that attention is no longer guaranteed, he starts to experience a feeling he had never associated with you before: insecurity. Louise Hay said that the human mind is designed to seek patterns and stability because they give us a sense of control over our reality. But when the behavior of someone who was always available suddenly changes, the brain goes into a state of alert. And exactly at that moment, the direction of the game changes. The man who once ignored you now senses that he no longer fully holds the control. He is forced to question whether he can truly continue behaving the same way without consequences. For the first time in a long while, he is the one feeling he might lose something valuable. And here lies the difference between a woman who is valued and one who is ignored. The woman who is valued knows that her attention is a privilege, not a duty. She does not chase, she does not beg, and above all, she does not accept less than she deserves. And when a man realizes he could actually lose her, his desire for control transforms into a deep need to be accepted once again. The most important thing, however, is this: the woman who once waited no longer waits for anything. She has become a woman who is no longer dependent on being chosen because she has realized that she has always had the power to choose who deserves to be in her life. This shift in mentality is what ultimately makes a man recognize the true value of a woman. And this is only the beginning of something much deeper. One of the greatest mistakes a woman can make in a relationship is clinging to the hope that a man will eventually open his eyes and recognize her true worth. But what many do not realize is this: no one can see in you what you have not yet learned to see within yourself. Louise Hay said that everything we accept in others is a reflection of what we have already accepted within ourselves. If you constantly settle for less than you deserve and continue to invest time, energy, and love into someone who does not reciprocate, you are sending a message to your own subconscious that you might not be worthy of something better. This belief, even if not always conscious, ultimately shapes the way you allow others to treat you. If you cling to a relationship without reciprocity and justify indifference by hoping that the other person will one day change, you are actually reinforcing the idea that your self-worth depends on external validation. But the truth is, the only person who can change this situation is you. Now imagine what happens when you stop living for that validation and begin to view yourself from a place of security and emotional independence. Think about the impact it has on a man when, from one day to the next, he realizes that the woman who once idealized him and waited longingly for his attention now seems completely free from his influence, and in that moment his presumed sense of security begins to fade, and for the first time he asks himself whether taking your presence for granted was perhaps a grave mistake. When a man senses that he has lost control over the situation, a feeling arises that he had never considered before: fear. It is not merely the fear of losing you as a person, but the unsettling realization that he is no longer important to you, that his absence no longer triggers a reaction in you, that he no longer plays the role he once did. This loss of influence can be devastating to his ego, because until that point, he was sure you would always be there, no matter what he did. And here, the balance of power shifts completely. The question is no longer whether he will come back, but rather, do you really want someone who only recognizes your worth once he fears losing you? Or wouldn't it be far more beautiful to have someone by your side who chooses you from the very beginning, without games, without proofs, without conditions, simply because he knows you are an extraordinary woman and would never doubt it? The truth is, a woman who knows she has options never panics when a man pulls away. She doesn't try to convince someone to choose her, because she knows her worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. In her world, love is not something to beg for or bargain over. Love is something that flows naturally. If you constantly have to try to be seen by someone, maybe it's time to stop hoping for their gaze and start seeing yourself through the eyes you always wished others would see you with. The real lesson in everything you've learned today goes far beyond figuring out how to make a man feel your absence. It's about something much deeper, becoming the kind of woman who never again asks for attention. A woman who no longer waits for messages, signs, or any kind of external validation in order to feel whole. It's time to leave behind the old mindset, the one that settled for emotional crumbs, and instead start living with the deep belief that self-love is the foundation of everything that truly matters. Because the moment you decide to see yourself with new eyes, the world begins to respond to that new energy. And the most ironic part is, the very man who thought he could ignore you without consequence suddenly finds himself in an entirely unexpected place with a desperate need to reclaim what he lost without even realizing it.